This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
The biggest icon in podcasting.
Welcome everybody to this week's edition of Doc and Jock. I am the Doc, John McAroo. Joining me, my cousin Adam, the Jock Strozinski. Looking forward to a great broadcast this week, a podcast where we're going to talk about the Detroit Lions. The Palace of Auburn Hills was imploded over the weekend. We got a lot of good things to talk about in regards to the Lions and how they could finish. I can't wait to broadcast with you, my friend. What's happening?
Yeah, this should be a really good podcast. It's going to be interesting to see which side of the aisle you fall on with our very first topic, because I have an idea of where I'm going, and I think I have an idea where you're going, Mr. Kool-Aid Man.
Listen, with the Detroit Lions, I came across something very interesting, and it brought me to the idea of where this team could finish in 2020. Look, most people think this Detroit Lions team is an 8-8 football team, and I just think that, when you evaluate this team, I'm wondering if this team can finish 7-9 or 9-7, because 8-8 is boring, and if they finish that way, it'll lead to some interesting decisions in regards to Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia. But in my mind, if you look at the range in which this team could finish, 7-9 to 9-7, because I do think that the division is going to produce a 10-win football team, maybe even 2. But in my mind, I think the Lions are right there and could be a 9-win football team, because of the fact that you look at the returning weapons on offense. They've improved the offensive line. They brought on DeAndre Swift. I think you got to ride Matthew Stafford and that arm in 2020. Darrell Bevell, you've worked with now, who's worked with the offense for now his second year. I think this team, and hear me out, because I'm sensing you're not as optimistic as I am, that this football team can take the next step forward if they just correct a couple mistakes on defense. You got to hear what some of the analysts have said, and you look at it and you go, you know what? If the offense carries the team, like we've said before, if the defense can just take a step from being god-awful to just being kind of mediocre, cutting out a certain few mistakes late in games, making a couple more plays, forcing a couple more turnovers at the right time, you got to figure what impact could some of these players that Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn brought, they got to take a step forward. And in my mind, I think they can legitimately win 9 games. If you look at a couple breaks falling their way on this schedule, I think that offense, when you start to look at rankings, as we're in ranking season, where everyone's looking at position groups, different players and where they slot in this year, you start looking at the Lions, Kenny Galladay, TJ Hawkinson, Jesse James, if he takes a step forward, the running backs, the offensive line, that offense looks legit in top 15 if they can just ride that offense, just play mediocre on defense, definitely take advantage of Matt Patricia and the new defensive coordinator, Corey Undlin, what he brings to the table. I could see, and I predicted this football team going 9-7.
Ifs and buts, candy and nuts. If my grandmother had balls, she'd be my grandfather, but that's not the case here. You're talking about all these subjective possibilities. What if? I look at what actually took place this offseason. Your general manager, Bob Quinn, your head coach, Matt Patricia, got rid of arguably your best defensive player in Darius Slay, drafted a rookie to take his place, and we both have had this discussion. Generally, cornerbacks take at least a year to develop, so I'm not expecting a ton out of Jeffrey Okudah. On top of that, if Matthew Stafford stays healthy, which he hasn't been able to do the last 2 seasons, on top of all of that, your backup quarterback situation might be a little bit better with Chase Daniels, but I don't know if it's great. Kerryon Johnson hasn't stayed healthy an entire season. You're putting a ton of weight on Kenny Galladay, putting a ton of weight on a guy like Marvin Jones. TJ Hawkinson, his first year was last year, and he was beat up. And now you got to incorporate a new rookie in DeAndre Swift. And your defense, let's not forget about your defense, all right? I know we touched about what happened with the cornerback position, but let's not forget about your defense. This defensive line was missing some help at the edge, and the front office and coaching staff has done little to zero to really help improve that. The defensive line is still a gigantic question mark. I love that you are so pumped up and you're eating the cornbread and you're drinking the Kool-Aid and you got the Honolulu blue baby oil smeared all over your naked body right now. But I do not see this team going 9-7. There's not a chance in hell. This team will be closer to 7-9, and I feel like they're going to be less than 7-9. If I had to take the under, I would go under 7-9 this year. I just don't see it happening. There are too many things that will probably go wrong and that can go wrong.
Now, cause you know what the hilarious thing is when you go back and research? Because you and I both, last year, I remember when Nate Davis came out and he was like, the Detroit Lions in 2019 are going to win 3 games. And we just damn near fell out of our chairs going, yeah, right, that's utterly hysterical. And I looked at what Sports Illustrated predicted the record to be. Last year in 2019, SI.com predicted the Lions to go 4-12. But nobody foreshadowed Stafford getting injured. So now you look at it, you got a healthy Matthew Stafford. And the reason why, I know many of the fans and supporters wanted a complete overhaul of the defensive line because it stunk so bad. But you also got to take into account, you got some second-year players and some young cats that the Lions are going to be counting on, Julian Okwara, Deshaun Hand, and Austin Bryant. The organization and Bob Quinn are going to count on those guys who have talent and have shown a Bryant at Clemson and Deshaun Hand when he was on the field showed propensity to be able to pressure the quarterback. So they're going to be counting on a lot of second-year players to take that next step forward. And trust me, I could understand if you could say, hey, I don't like any of them, but I like Amani Oruwariye in the secondary. He might also be able to aid Jeff Okudah's transition. You brought in a veteran, Desmond Trufant, to kind of take the place. And remember, with Darius Slay, that defense was getting torched. So maybe a new mix, a new flair with Corey Undlin, who on film looks to be a little bit more aggressive. You know, his secondary in Philadelphia. I know also people can complain that they got torched a little bit as well.
They were trash.
They were not good, but I'll say this. I'll say this. Matt Patricia has a way, potentially. You look at this side of things, okay? And I know many fans are always looking at bottom line and they lost the games. But last year, the Lions were 3-4-1. And they were in a lot of games and they were competitive. They just needed to make 2 or 3 more plays. And yeah, the scheme is awful and you and I will rant and rave and bitch and complain that it's too passive and that they don't blitz enough. But if Patricia adjusts slightly, and let's just say he blitzes 5% more in 2020, you don't think that there's an opportunity that the defense can go from mediocre to just average to help out the cause? I do believe with Collins, with Duron Harmon, with the likes of Trey Flowers, I think the team, if you just stay on the positive side of things, the team can play a really decent brand of football. And if they get off to at least a 500 start, you're on your way to 9 wins. Remember, most football teams fall in that 7-9 to 9-7 range, and you're just counting on basically 5 breaks. Do they get those 5 breaks? Because all the breaks in 2019 went against the Lions. I mean, look, everyone's going to argue that is on the positivity side that this Lions team was playing unbelievable football and they got jobbed against Green Bay when, you know, Trey Flowers got these phantom calls against them. If that can just be avoided, maybe with less fans and less distractions, these NFL referees can at least see what's going on and focus on the plays right in front of them. If they don't jack up the Lions, I think the Lions have a real opportunity to make some plays. I mean, Kenny Galladay, severe deep threat. You got Marvin Hall. You got Quintez Cephas, Marvin Jones. And if they can properly use the tight ends, on paper, it makes sense that this team, and I know, trust me, we've watched some garbage football, but on paper, this is probably the 2020 version is the best version that the Lions have had under Bob Quinn, especially with the salary cap still having $20 million available. You got a returning Matthew Stafford who's got to be hungry because he's knowing that his contract time is ticking and that this regime, I wonder how he's going to respond to the pressure because this quarterback, he cannot want another whole regime to come in here if Quinn and Patricia fail. So I think the pressure might actually do the team some good. And you never know. Okudah and Swift just might be what the doctor ordered. Why so negative right away?
Look, I'll give you this, right? I think if Matt Stafford comes back and he's 100% healthy and he's able to make it through 16 games this season, I think your offense is in a prime position to really help do some of the heavy lifting for this team. My big issue comes with this defense. Now, you said that if this team is able to blitz, say, 5% more, if they're able to put some pressure on the quarterback, all of that comes with scheme, and I'm not trusting Matt Patricia and his scheme. I'm not trusting this new defensive coordinator to come in and make that big of a difference either. Looking at what happened in Philadelphia, that secondary was absolute garbage. I think you still believe, deep down in your heart of hearts, I think you still believe that Matt Patricia is going to be the head defensive coordinator making all of the calls. I think we both believe that basically defensive coordinator on this team is just a figurehead position. It's just there because you got to name somebody. When it comes down to it and when you put brass to tacks, it's still going to be Matt Patricia making all of those calls. He's going to be the one calling in the plays. And Matt Patricia, over the last couple of years, has given me zero thought that he is willing to adjust his scheme. I think he believes his scheme is the right way and his scheme is the only way. And what that means, it means showing 4 and bringing 4. It means showing 3 and bringing 3. He's not going to overload anything, and he's not going to send guys in on all-out blitzes. He just isn't going to do it. He's going to run what he's been running, and it's going to be this bend but don't break. The problem with that is you don't have enough pressure up front to help bail out your secondary time and time again. And as the game stretches on and the defense is out there for even more periods of time, that secondary wears down, they get tired, and the next thing you know, they are susceptible to big plays down the field and they get taken advantage of. I just don't trust this coach and I don't trust this staff to be able to adjust and make the necessary plays and make the necessary adjustments with the personnel and be able to adjust that scheme on the fly to be able to get the results that you need to be a 9-7, be a 10-6 football team. I think this team does enough to hurt itself from being really, really good, and it has nothing to do with the offense, because I thought the offense last year, doing it with makeshift quarterbacks, second and third and fourth tier guys, I thought this offense looked really respectable. I thought time and time again last year, this team was let down by that defense, and that falls solely at the feet of Matt Patricia and nobody else. And it's because he is too stubborn to get out of his own way and make the necessary adjustments. And even listen to players who are telling him, like, hey, coach, this isn't going to work and it's not going to work because of this. And then you go into the game and it doesn't work because of that. And then next thing you know, players are getting shipped out of town for bags of balls and jock straps. I mean, at this point, we've got a ton of footballs and we've got a ton of cups. We just got nobody to put them on.
Okay, so I do want to ask one scheme-related question because, you know, obviously the Lions in their secondary played man-to-man, the third most in the National Football League. The team that did it the most was the Patriots, and they had Gilmore, arguably one of the greatest defensive backs now in the last couple years, and he's manning the ship for the New England Patriots defense. So you look at it and you say, okay, was it really actually the players' fault that they didn't succeed in the first 2 years, or was it a situation where Patricia and Quinn needed time to bring in their guys who understand the complexity of what they're trying to do? Because, you know, when you listen to Matt Patricia talk, it probably makes sense to assume that that defense is so complicated that it depends on players making live adjustments on the field, and it takes time for a group of players to understand it fully. It has worked. And I know people will say that it was Bill Belichick, the head coach, and the general manager, and the magic of Tom Brady. But Matt Patricia did absorb some of it. And you just got to remember, if you look at just a couple games, you recognize that others like Bill Belichick, others like the Rams and the 49ers have taken from the Lions against common opponents. Because why? That defense has principles that should translate to success. And if the players do believe and they take the next step forward, I think this football team can actually wow some people. They can do a lot of good things if they can. And it really is true. The game of football comes down to just really like 5 to 6 plays in the fourth quarter. I don't expect the Lions to get blown out too many times. I don't expect the Lions to do a lot of blowing out as well. I think they'll be in a lot of games. And if they take the stance of, hey, controlling the football taking advantage of opportunities. You got weapons all over the field offensively. Defensively, they can make some plays if the players make the proper adjustments. And I think it seems like from what they targeted, Julian Aquara, Okuda, you realize that those guys kind of come from schemes that should translate well without needing a bunch of mini camps to the field. I think you're going to see pleasantly, you know what? I will say this. I initially had thought that the Lions were going to start 1-3. I think legitimately, if you can just get through the first 4 games, 2-2, defeat the Bears and the Packers, potentially, or maybe even start off 2-0, there's an opportunity to kind of string off some victories in the middle portion of that schedule. You could come away with 9 victories. If you look at it, you basically got to steal one, either from Tampa Bay, New Orleans, maybe one in the division. It's not too difficult to track 9 wins. And the key factor, I think, in my mind, probably won't be the blitzes, because you're right. They probably won't up it a whole heck of a lot. The key will be late in the fourth quarter. Do they stop the penalties? Because I know you probably saw in 2012 how god-awful those penalties and when they came were. Same thing happened in 2019. I mean, literally after every game, Patricia stood up there and was like, penalties, they got us. False starts, pass interference, unbelievable penalties that came at the worst time that helped the opponent extend drives. But you got to look at it like this. I think in the third year, you'll get a sense pretty quickly. Within 5 to 6 games, if this football team is 4-2, 5-1, if they get off to a great start, then my prediction will come true. If they struggle, if it's just too complicated, the argument that you have that's secure that many will have is maybe Matt Patricia is a good coach, but he's a horrible teacher. He just can't relay that information to people consistently enough, because what do you make of this? Willie McGinnis went on television and was like, Matt Patricia took over a team that wasn't that great, and be patient. He said, Matt Patricia, if you stick with him, likely will have the opportunity to have success. And others have said that too. Mariucci, many of the fraternity have said that if you're patient with Matt Patricia, he will deliver. I think you and I both probably don't want to be patient, but I think in the third year, if he turns it around, turns that corner, gets to 9 wins, we could be seeing the start of something good here. If you just want to choose the lens of positivity, there's a lot of good that has taken place with the Lions.
This is my problem with what I have that you just did by comparing Detroit's defense to New England's defense. Last year, New England's defense was the 10th best at pressuring the quarterback. They had 47 sacks. Detroit's defense was 4th worst and only had 28 sacks. So unless you're getting that pressure from the front, I don't know how that's going to help that secondary. And look, I know Stephon Gilmore's a beast, and I know that defense, specifically the New England Patriots defense, had a ton of interceptions and a ton of takeaways. Unless that Detroit defense is going to start to provide some pressure up front and make things crazy for a quarterback who's sitting back in the pocket, I just don't see this defense working out well. You have to be able to provide that pressure, and you've got to make it a scary and a crazy situation for a quarterback. You remember the Dallas game? I mean, there was nothing more damning that came out than Dak Prescott, who, if you ask me, I think is a very average quarterback. I think he's in line for a monster payday, but I think Dak Prescott's a very average quarterback. I would take Matthew Stafford, even at his age with his beat-up back, over Dak Prescott just about any day of the week, okay? And that's not me being a homer. That's just how I see it. I don't think Dak Prescott is a great quarterback. I think he's a good quarterback who finds himself in a great position. Dak Prescott, after that game, came out and said, I had all day to make my reads. I sat in the pocket, and I went through my reads one time, and then I came back and I went through my reads twice. We knew exactly what they were going to do, and it allowed us to pick them apart. His words, not mine. And that's exactly what happened to that Dallas game. If you're not getting pressure up front, you put your secondary in a bad spot. And again, it's a lot of bending, don't break. But when there's no pressure up front, all that can happen is it can break. And that's what happened last year. And I don't think he's going to change his scheme. That's my problem.
Yeah, you don't believe that there will be any adjustment, that there will not be any more pressure brought by the likes of Austin Bryant, Julian Aquara, his brother Romeo Aquara, Trey Flowers. You don't think that they brought in more guys like Nick Williams, Danny Shelton to stop the rush and maybe pressure more? So do you think that there will be no adjustments? You think it's just more of the same, and he's praying that they make the one play to win it all, and you don't believe that they'll even accomplish that? I would be shocked. I literally, though, would be shocked if he went into 2020 and acted the same way he did in 2019. That would show no growth. That would show no willingness to make changes. You've seen a personality change slightly in the way in which he's talking about things. I think that Patricia has at least said it publicly that he can scheme any which way he wants. And I think that he might have believed in 2019 that if they were to pressure more with who they had on the field, that they would have got torched. So you could look at it and say that he did the best he could with what he had from that perspective. And now that he's got a little bit more, he might be willing to let it rip. But I definitely would agree that if he blitzes at the same rate, if it's bend, don't break, it's going to be unbelievably tough to stop these offenses because they're so prolific. But do you think that the Lions, let's say they do finish 7-9, do you think then that they are still the third best team in the division then? Or do they fall back in last place? Because it's been 2 straight years of last place finishes, 7 wins. I mean, the Bears are looking at 8-8. You could be, with 7 wins, still in last place.
I think if they get 7 wins, they'll probably be the third best team in this division. I think right now, the way it kind of sits, Minnesota is probably heads and tails above Green Bay, and Green Bay is heads and tails above both the Bears and the Lions. I think the issue is, with the Bears, you're not sure who their quarterback's going to be, right? And that organization seems like they believe in Trubisky, but then they went in and they brought Foles in, and it's just, there's too many question marks with who's going to be under center and which Nick Foles are you going to get if he is your starter. Whereas with the Lions, as long as Matt Stafford's healthy, I think Matt Stafford is a top 10 quarterback in this league, and you can put him on just about any team. We did it last week. Put him on just about any team, and he's going to make that team better. The problem is he just has to stay healthy. I think if this team is good enough to get 7 wins, I think absolutely you have Matt Patricia and you've got Bob Quinn. I think they come back for another year and they get another go-around to try to figure it out. I think no matter what, really and truly, they're coming back, and that's just because the Fords don't like to pay money for people to sit on their couch. So whether they win 5 games or they win 7 games, you're going to have the same front office, same coaching staff here. But I think 7 wins, I think this organization would be feeling really good about itself.
Okay, I want to get your sense before we start talking about the Palace and the recent implosion. The Palace of Auburn Hills is no more, and Adam and I will share memories and what we think of the Palace being destroyed and no longer there over there in Auburn Hills. What'd you make of the Washington Redskins the moment the sponsor said, hey, can you consider changing your name? Within like 10 days, they're like, okay. That's how much attached Dan Snyder is to money and the sponsors. And really, I mean, you can't really be surprised. You know, this is an owner that back in 2001 was screaming at the high heavens, we will never change this name. Our name means tradition. Our name means this. And he's been on record multiple times saying, I'm not changing the name. All of a sudden, the big dollars are threatened to be taken away. And he's like, you know what? 10 days later, fuck the history. We'll change it right away. I just thought that it was, look, bottom line, he's making the right call. I don't really care either way what the name is. The Redskins brought the Lions the worst memory ever. They were the barrier. That 91 Redskins team destroyed the Lions, and the Lions were decent in 91. They got their lone playoff victory. They got to the NFC title game, and then Mark Rippon put the pimp slap all over Detroit, and he destroyed the Lions, and those Gibbs teams were awesome. I liked that team. I was a fan of that style of football with Joe Gibbs and Mark Rippon and the manner in which they did things. I was always a fan of Art Monk, the manner in which he conducted himself. So I was always, from afar, not a fan, just intrigued by the success that the Redskins had and their couple Super Bowl runs. But under Dan Snyder, oh my God, it's like watching the Lions part 2, the Lions East. Oh my God, the bad signings, the retread coaches, Steve Spurrier, all the horrible signings that they made and overpaid. It's like, holy cow, could you make any worse decisions? But in the end, when the sponsors and the naming FedEx Field's like, hey, we're going to consider pulling some dollars if you don't change this name, and the public pressure that he felt for all this time, they finally did it, and I think it's fine that he made the move, but I just think he did it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's Dan Snyder. I don't think anything should surprise anybody. I mean, he's kind of one of the worst owners in all of sports. He's a total scumbag. So the fact that it took the pressure from his sponsors pulling out or saying, hey, we're not going to pay to be your stadium sponsor. It'll no longer be FedEx Field. And Nike's like, hey, we're not making this jersey anymore. And he's like, oh, wait, we're losing dollars? Oh, I probably should change something. There's only one language that man understands, and it is money. It surprises me very little that the one thing that got him to change his ways was the fact that it took corporate dollars to really give him the nudge and the push to get over that hump to say, yeah, we're going to change our name. And like you said, in a matter of less than, 10 days, we're going to have an announcement on what their new name's going to be. So it doesn't surprise me in the least bit. I do have a question for you, though. Is there a name out there that you would prefer it to be or that you would like it to be?
You know what? It came across Twitter, and I laughed when I saw it. But the more I read it, the more I liked it. Dan Wetzel was clowning around, and it was funny to me, the way in which he said it and the way it sounded. You know, you're hearing Red Tails, Wounded Warriors. But Dan Wetzel, columnist from Yahoo, was hilarious. He said they should just simply
Detroit's own, by the way.
Detroit's own. He said they should just call the Washington team the Washington Corruption. And the name made me laugh because the more you think about it, that's an interesting, unique name, Corruption. It'll never be that. But the more you say it, the more it rings off the tongue like it sounds good. Washington Corruption. You know, I was thinking more like, okay, if you want to go back to old school, Washington Generals, Washington Veterans, stuff like that. But I don't know, because there was a genius out there, and I don't know if you saw this, he trademarked every possible name. But I think the wrinkle that this gentleman, while he's a genius for doing it, I think the wrinkle for trademarks is if you're not going to use it for commercial purposes, you can't really just do that, especially with a league as powerful as the NFL, especially with how many lawyers they have. It makes, I think I read that the trademark will be null and void if you just buy it with the intention of flipping it. You can do it, but not at the high profile level of the NFL, that if he fails to show that he could use Red Tails in a commercial manner, the trademark will be null and void and he'll get stripped of it pretty quickly. But a smart guy did it. He went and got basically 50 trademarks, Red Tails, all different variations, and it's a genius move. But in my mind, I'm not certain what rings off the tongue, but I'm not certain. What do you think?
I don't mind Red Tails. Washington Generals isn't too bad. I like that one. Or the Washington Fighters, that's cool too. It's going to be something super generic. I don't want Warriors though. Warriors is not something I want.
Not fresh, yeah. And it's not easy. I know that they'll make the decision, and I think that's why it took so long for them to now announce it at this point in time, because it's not something that you can just flippantly make a decision on. You got to, get logos and trademarks and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see when that name comes out. I think that a lot of people were impressed that he actually finally made the decision. And it's a good sign for the league to move forward from it. And if you heard, a Michigan high school team, I think the Paw Paws is what they're called, out there, they decided to change their name from the Redskins as well. And they made some news by making that decision. But I just hope that the Braves or the Indians, I hope they don't decide to do the same thing and piggyback off of that. Because, yes, the change is good, but Indians, I don't think has a negative connotation. Braves, I don't think has Chiefs. I hope that not too many change their names, because then you're just going to have a whole bunch of upheaval for the sake of it. Because I think by and large, Redskins was the most offensive team name that has been out there that people have talked about for ages. So we shall see what the name becomes. I wonder if it'll be a good one, but chances are, based on how that organization's ran, they'll probably pick the least appealing name. All right, cuz, it is crazy to believe that I think you and I were alive. Yes, we were, when the Palace was built. And we've seen now in our lifetime a couple of buildings that were built and torn down, relatively speaking, within 40 years. And you're like, wow, these owners can take advantage of opportunities to upgrade or use tax dollars to upgrade their stadiums and things like that. To think that, we were youngsters when the Palace was built, when the Pistons were playing at the Silverdome and then Joe Louis and Cobo, you realize, wow, the Palace was such a great place to play and was still new back in 89, 90 when they decided to crank it up in there and to handle their business. So you realize that building only being 30 years old is crazy to think that it's gone. And fine, you could make the argument that Tom Gores taking a partnership deal with the Red Wings and LCA has moved the team to Detroit and get a practice facility centralized. I get it. But to have the Palace gone completely is wild because of how great a concert venue that was. The total package of an arena that you could have had amazing concerts still to this day at that facility. And, you know, you and I being fond of wrestling, you know, we host a DocNJock wrestling podcast every Friday on this very network. World War III, all the Nitros. It was a great place to even watch professional wrestling. But everyone's going to remember the Pistons, the great memories, the titles, the unbelievable brawl that happened there. There was a lot of fun memories of a time that Palace gave to a lot of people. And then the sick part is, how do you drop millions of dollars to upgrade the joint only to move out? This owner is crazy, and it must be so crazy rich to just be like, sure, I'll drop a couple $1 million to make all the seats brand new and nice and to upgrade the facility and then only to turn around to leave. In my mind, I felt like the Palace still had more use. It felt like you blew up a building that still had a lot left to give.
Yeah, I don't understand how you can destroy a building that was still in its prime. And you're right, they just underwent all these renovations. I mean, you remember a few years ago, before they just recently tore it down, me and you got to see an inside look of everything with that building. I mean, they walked us around and showed us all the nooks and crannies of that building, and it was pristine. And you're right, it was probably a better concert venue, and it was probably a better venue than it might have been a sports venue, but it was still a fantastic building. It was amazing to see how updated it was and how well it aged. The Palace had some of the best sight lines out of any arena in this area. It was one of the easiest to get in and get out of as far as getting into the actual building. Getting out of that parking lot was kind of a mess, but other than that, it was a fantastic venue. I loved it for concerts. Some of my best memories are concerts that I went to there, and I've seen probably about 5 or 6 concerts there. The fact that Tom Gores, like you said, spent all this money to dump a whole bunch of cash in it to renovate it, to only turn around to have it disposed of, is kind of outrageous. The fact that nobody could find anything better to do with that venue, I think is deplorable, and I think it's sad. That venue could have been utilized for Oakland basketball. That venue could have been utilized for any type of concert event, any type of graduation event. There's 1,001 things that venue could have been utilized for. Instead, they allowed it to lie vacant for over a year, and then they blew it up for what seemingly was no good reason. I thought it was a sad, sad decision that was made.
Yeah, the Pistons, man, the great memories there. The malice at the Palace was unbelievable to look at. So you see a situation in which, you know, the building is gone now, and it was sad to see the Joe and the Palace look like that in the manner in which they were stripped down. So good memories in terms of the functionality and, like you said, the concerts, the wrestling events, the Pistons. And a great memory that I had, and I know maybe you'll share one, was we got to see Michigan State, I think, play. It was either, I can't remember which team that they played. One of the first times I went out there to see State outside of the Breslin Center was at the Palace. And it was against Oakland, I believe. And
yeah,
it was probably Oakland. They jammed the place. And I recall, too, that in the 2000, I think, NCAA tournament, wasn't the regional that they won? Wasn't it? Or it was, if I'm mistaken, you'll correct me. But I recall one of the regionals was at the Palace, and Michigan State played a tight game and had an NCAA victory in the Palace as well. So it also held some great college events and things like that. But one of my great memories was seeing Michigan State play at the Breslin with a bunch of fans, and it was just a great electricity. And the other great memory that I had was Jim Rome came and did a tour stop. And speaking of WDFN, no longer on the air, it was a great event. Jim Rome brings out John L. Smith. At that time, what Jim Rome did was he took his show, not his radio show, but his interview style, and he took it to different venues, and he called them tour stops. And he would just bring on local coaches and dignitaries, things like that. He'd just interview them right there on stage. And he had Ernie Harwell, he had John L. Smith, and he had one of the Red Wings, I think maybe even Darren McCarty. And John L. Smith's out there, and it's a pro-Michigan house, and everyone's booing. And John L. Smith takes it in stride. He looks out to the sea of people, and he's like, "Where's your coach?" And he shut everybody up, and everybody was laughing with that Southern drawl. He floored Jim Rome, and his interview was great because he was calling out. He's like, "Where's all you guys are all booing me?" He's like, "Where's your coach? He's not here." And it was a great event. We tailgated for the tour stop. Jim Rome brought the house down with his interview style. And the Pals just had a lot of great memories, and it's sad to see it go, man. It sucks.
Yeah, I think that regional championship you're talking about, or that regional win for MSU, I think that was the year that they ended up losing to Syracuse, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. If I remember correctly, I don't know. I could be wrong. But no, you're right. It was a spectacular venue. So for me, some of my fondest memories were concerts that I got to see there, and you're going to laugh at me, and it's okay. I don't mind. Everybody can laugh. I'm a huge New Kids on the Block fan, and I've seen New Kids on the Block there, I think, twice, and they were fantastic concerts. I also took an ex-girlfriend there to see Janet Jackson, and that was a good time as well. A lot of good basketball games. I got to sit courtside one year, and and Allen Iverson was my favorite basketball player as a small child growing up, or I should say an adolescent child growing up. As a small child, I think Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars were probably my favorite. But Allen Iverson was one of my favorite basketball players of all time, and I got to sit courtside and watch him play against the Pistons, and I came very, very close to getting an autograph from him. However, I did not. But that was back when Chauncey Billups and Tayshaun and Rip and Ben and Rasheed were all part of that basketball team. I don't think it was 2004. Nice. I think it was a few years later, but it was a lot of fun to sit that close and see those guys play that hard. It was great.
Good stuff. Why was Allen Iverson your favorite?
Just the way he played. He was so cutthroat. I mean, the guy played with an attitude and a swagger like nobody's business, and he was a little guy, and he got bullied and he got pushed around, and he fought back, and I don't know. I loved Allen Iverson back when he played in Georgetown. That was where I fell in love with him. I was watching some random ACC basketball game on a Saturday when I was a child, and I was like, I really like this guy. And then when he went to the league, I was like, I absolutely love this guy. So he was my dude, man, for some reason or another.
Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, yeah, it was, I can't say the year. Michigan State edged Oakland 99-93 in overtime. I was at that game. It was an overtime game in which Oakland held their own against the Spartan, and that was definitely a great memory there. Oh, my goodness. Make sure you follow Adam on Twitter at AdamRSTROZ. Follow the network at Detroit Podcast. If you have any memories of the Palace that you want to share. Oh, man. Times change, but you know what doesn't change? The Detroit Sports Podcast. Every Thursday, Doc and Jock will deliver a fine podcast. Want to thank Noah for the great work he's done. Our first ever intern has done quality work. Check out his open mic podcast, because not only do we put him to work, we also gave him a podcast. And his first two guests, outstanding, Matt Derry and Dan Dickerson of the Tigers. Make sure you check out Doc and Jock Wrestling Podcast. Make sure you download Adam's two other podcasts. The Practice Squad comes out Fridays, and the Throwback, in which Adam, not only can he sits and supports the Lions in good times and in bad, he wants to also revisit old Detroit Lions games, and many people are definitely tuning in. He's currently with Brendan Riley rewatching the 2012 season, and judging by where he's at in that season, this is the time you want to listen, because he's about to be pissed off. And
I had my breaking point this week.
Absolutely.
Tune in.
Tune in this Sunday for the Throwback Podcast. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you so much for pushing that subscribe button. Each and every quarter, our numbers are going up. Awesome subscribership, and we can't thank you enough for what you've allowed Adam and I to do with this fun project we started back in 2013. Thanks again for downloading the latest edition of Doc and Jock. We'll talk to everybody next Thursday.